Alright, I think this video is going to be a bit of a longer video. I'm going to go through each of these cards here for the Ultramarines in Warhammer 40,000 Warpforge. So this will be my opinion on these cards, how they play in Constructed and in Draft, and you can use this as a data point to add to what you think about these cards. So the unique thing about Ultramarines here is because we have this Codex mechanic that triggers on exact change only, the energy cost of these cards becomes very important, and you can really only compare cards at the same energy level. As soon as you go up or down one energy level, you're kind of on a different slot in your deck, and it's almost playing a different role. So the energy cost of these cards becomes very important for these Ultramarines. So we'll start with our warlords here. You start with Uriel Ventress, and his ability is to have this card each turn. For 2 energy, you deal 1 damage to an enemy and the adjacent units. And with all of these warlords here for Ultramarines, they're not really tied to a specific archetype. You don't necessarily have to play a certain way with any of these warlords. This could be used in an aggressive deck where you're trying to deal as much damage as possible, or you could use this same warlord for a slower control deck where you're trying to play for the end game. Either way you can play with this. You're just using this repeatedly to keep the board clear or to ping extra damage as you're going through. So several different ways you can play that. Vario Tigarius also even more so provides you with options. For 2 energy, you choose a psychic power and put it in your hand, and you have the choice of these psychic powers. For 0 cost, you can draw a stratagem. For 1 cost, you can deal 1 to 3 damage. Or for 2 cost, you can give shield to a friendly unit. These are okay. None of them are great. My overall opinion is I would rather just draw a card from my deck than end up with any of these, especially for the total cost of 4 here to give shield to a friendly unit, which certainly you can make it worth it, but it's not necessarily the best use of your energy, I feel. But the versatility here and the reliability here is going to be very helpful. Having always access to this damage every turn is helpful. Having always access to a shield, always access to drawing stratagems at a relatively low cost. You still have to pay the 2 to get this card, but then you can pull a stratagem. I would say the combination there of the versatility here and the reliability of always having these is what gives Pharaoh the advantage in when you're playing him. Overall, I think the simply drawing another card from your deck, which is typically going to be much more powerful than any of those previous options, even though it's not consistent, it is going to be more powerful, I think. I've been playing with Marnus Calgar. I think it's the way to go, and that's been in a slower control late game sort of deck, but you could also run this in a faster damage dealing deck. But if you're spending a lot of energy drawing cards, then you're not really playing a fast deck. So probably this is going to be better overall in a slower, more control-based deck, where you're using this to have options. Where you have the options immediately available, but none of them are particularly powerful. So that's our warlords that you have available. There's a variety of ways to play any one of them, so definitely arguments to be made to slot those in almost any deck. So it becomes personal preference and really what you're trying to achieve in your game. So, Tactical Insight for 0 cost, which is unique in that it costs 0, and so the main advantage here is that you're re-triggering your Codex ability. You use up all your mana, and then you drop this for 0, and then you spend the 2 again, and your Codex re-triggers. The problem with this card is it doesn't do anything by itself. It fully depends on what you have on the board. You can use it for ramp as well, but what we'll see as a kind of recurring theme here with some of these cards is that it's not necessarily good early game or late game. Let me say it's not great early game or late game. So early game, you could maybe drop this on your first turn, and then get 2 more mana, drop another one, trigger the Codex. You know, if you got the 2 drops for it, it's okay. Like, it gives you a rush at the beginning, but it's not a huge game-turning advantage or anything at the beginning. And then late game, especially if you have an empty board and limited options in your hand, it could be worthless as a late game draw. So you often have plenty of energy late game if you're making it there. This might help you spend some of your cards, get a few more cards on the board, but it's probably better just to draw a better card and have that as an option. So generally I think this card is not really worth it. However, if you're running a pure Codex deck and you're just trying to trigger Codex as many times as possible for the main gas of your deck, you're doing all these damage dealings and stuns and everything off of your Codex. Hitting your Codex twice in a turn is more of an advantage there when you're trying for that sort of gameplay where you have several pieces out on the board and they all have Codex. Then this becomes more worth it, but in any other deck it just doesn't do enough to be worth its slot in your deck. And moving to the 1 cost, that's gonna be my opinion for pretty much everything here. Because the game, your first turn you have 2 energy, there's no 1 energy turn where this would be very useful. Best case, on your first turn you could have 2 1 cost things and play them both. It's still underwhelming. The only really things would be the 2 guys. These you want on your subsequent turns. You don't want to play this on your 2 energy turn, maybe on your 3 energy turn if you have a 2 energy guy down. You play that on your 3, but you probably want to be dropping a 3 energy thing on your 3rd turn. So these kind of become relegated to the late game, and then what kind of influence do they have on the late game? It's not really a bomb that's game changing in any of these cases. But to get into some of them specifically, you blind an enemy when this guy gets played. Octavio Infiltrator. So that's going to be a combat trick. You could use it sort of as pseudo removal. It's pretty... That's kind of a stretch to call it removal, but you can definitely use it like that. You drop it in, you blind somebody, and then you can slam anybody and anything into it on the range side without taking any damage. And use that to drop out even a big bomb late game. But that takes up a lot of your turn and your combat and your energy going out. It's so far from being a pure removal card that raises the question, why don't you just run removal? Similar for the Sacred Bolter. Sacred Bolter has some good interactions with the sniper. If you have some snipers in your deck, giving some extra range attack can turn that into a 2-for-1. But again, just a pure removal card is going to be better at almost any stage of the game. The only advantage is that it's a low cost. You can slip it in with some other stuff late game. And the other aspect of these 1 cost cards is making it easier to hit your Codex overall. I don't feel that it's necessarily worth it because the cards are underwhelming late game, and I'd rather have a big bomb late game. You're not really going to run this at 2 energy or 3 energy. You have plenty of 4 energy stuff, 5 energy stuff. Maybe you run this on your 6 energy turn when you have a 5+1, but you could also just do a 4+2 there. You always have that option, and it just turns into that pattern for each subsequent turn. If you don't have something 7 cost, maybe a 6+1, but are you likely going to have a 6 cost something? Probably not. You're probably going to do a 5+2 on your 7. You go to 8, you probably have an 8 by that point in the game. If not, you know, it'll be 5+3, 6+2 maybe, but 4+4 is more likely. Like, there's just other options without using these ones. On your 9 energy turn, sometimes you really want this one to hit an 8+1, but there's other options there too. 5+4 or something on your 9 energy turn. It's not necessarily game winning, but you can still hit your codex if you even need it. The codex also depends on already having codex out on the board, and typically you're just going to hit it on your turn 5 when you're dropping your 5 cost codex or something like that. It isn't necessarily going to be sticking around unless you're playing a slower deck like that, and so you're not necessarily going to be hitting your codexes every turn anyways. You're just not going to have that opportunity unless your deck is all codex and you're building around it, in which case having more options and the ability to hit any given number of energy becomes more important to have the ones. And on that note also, as you get into late game, because you have some reduction in costs, it doesn't become hard to hit your energies. And really late game, unless you have a lot of card draw going, you're going to be running out of cards anyways. You're going to have tons of energy. You're not going to be able to hit 12, 13 energy every turn anyways. So having a +1 to hit that exact number isn't going to help you. You really want more 5s or 6s or something in that range, even late game. But to finish up the assessment here, we have the same thing going on here. He hits for 1 coming in. That can be great your first turn, deal with somebody that's at 3 health or something. But this isn't what you want to be playing on your first turn anyways, unless you have 2 of these to use both your energies. And I don't know, how many of these do you want in your deck? 1 damage doesn't do much late game. Camouflage doesn't really. I mean, it protects your 1-drop guy, but is he going to be targeting it anyways? I don't know. He's just going to slap it with his warlord, so doesn't do much. And this maybe has its place. It's tough to use this as removal though, because it's affecting all your units as well. Could use it a bit for survivability, but it's not a card I'm ever going to be excited about drawing or even having in my starting hand or at any point. So that's the situation with the 1-drops in the Ultramarines army. Unless you really feel you needed to hit your codexes every time, you might as well just start your curve at the 2 drops. So looking at our 2 drops here, there's you know, this point blank shot is one of our best cards just overall. It's removal and draws a card. It's just top tier. Should be probably 2 of in every Ultramarines deck. On the far side of that, we have this, which I would never run because he doesn't do anything. He's just vanilla creature. The Reaver here is pseudo removal. He has flank when he comes in. He hits for 3. You can just target something with 3 health and remove it. That's mostly what you're going to be using it for, and I feel that there's better options for removing something of that small. The other guys here are alright. This guy's probably the better one. He hits for an extra damage. He doesn't necessarily get traded right away. given that he has 3 health, but he isn't going to stick around the board for too long. But for your first opening turn, he's pretty solid. This guy's close to him in strength, I think, but my issue with him is just not affecting the board significantly enough. Especially late game, he's very easy for your opponent to get rid of, and then he hasn't done anything. He's just barely slowed them at all. And early game, he's not bringing enough influence to the game. Not that the firstborn is really influencing the game, but I feel you get a little more out of him. So our other 2 drops are stratagems here. You can give flank and +1 melee to a friendly troop. So the ideal play would be you play something and this card in the same turn, giving a surprise attack, maybe as a trade or maybe something that could stick around on the board. The problem is this card doesn't do anything on its own. You need to have something else ready to go. It needs to be relatively late in the game for you to be playing a body plus this card. So you're using 2. It might turn into a 2-for-1 again, not in your favor. So unless you have a really good situation, it's not card advantage, it's card disadvantage, and it's a card that doesn't do anything on its own. So not particularly strong. If you're running a draft deck and you got a whole bunch of bodies around, it's fun to have as a combat trick. You can turn your bodies into removal, especially as you get into the later turns of draft. If you've got any card draw going and you've got some cards in your hand, you can use it as pseudo removal or as a trick to get some weird advantage in combat. Pry Vanguard, +2 melee attack and Vanguard to a friendly troop. It's a bonus that they keep. That's nice. Again, card disadvantage. This card doesn't do anything on its own. You're giving a buff to a troop, so you have to have somebody else out there already. You probably want to do it on the same turn. It gives you options, but at a cost of card disadvantage. That is to say, you'd be better off spending 2 more energy on a bigger play. Just run a big guy with Vanguard in your deck. There's not a lot of combat tricks or anything you can get by sticking Vanguard on somebody. Maybe as a defensive in your last resort, but at that point, just run the big guy with Vanguard, or run some more removal, or deal with your problem differently. It's hard to justify running in a constructed deck. In draft, again, it's fine. It's going to make your vanilla troops more difficult to trade and get some more value out of them. It's not the worst thing at all. Humanity Shield, your warlord becomes invulnerable until your next turn. You might be able to get some combat tricks out of it. You might be able to get some defensive stalling. If you're depending on this card to stall, then you've already lost, and it's not going to necessarily help you at all. And if you're using it for combat tricks, you're better off just to run some more removal and trade things that way, instead of spending a whole card just to buff your warlord to get a better trade or something. I don't see it as worth it early game or late game. I don't even think it's particularly strong in draft. Let me know in the comments if I'm missing something here, but this being a legendary particularly, I don't see chasing it or even adding it to my deck if I had it. And the final 2 drop here, the chapters do. Choose a friendly infantry unit that died this game and return it to your deck. Draw a card. You draw a card off of it is one of the strongest aspects of it. Putting an infantry from your graveyard back into your deck. It has minimal impact on the game. You might keep buffs that go with it, so there's maybe some potential for some tricky combo shenanigans where you're controlling what's available in your graveyard and you pull from those options back into your deck, and maybe even pulling from your deck with some cards that target infantry in your deck. I don't know. Good luck. But under normal circumstances, paying 2 to draw a card, you don't need. If it's not having any significant effect on the game, then why are you running it? Well, there's potential there. Could be something. So that's the 2 drops in, and you want to have plenty of 2 drops. However, remember you also have your Warlord ability cards for 2. So as far as your curve is concerned, you're thinking about how many 2 drops you need. Remember that you always have a 2 drop available, so it can be nice to have a body on your first turn, and certainly point blank shot is worth it, but given that you always have 2 drops to play, and the 2 drop slot becomes crowded quickly. 3 drops, however, is more essential in your deck, and you need to have several of these because you want to hit this on turn 3, maybe even turn 5 as a 2+3, or even later turns, turn 8, 5+3 or something. So luckily there's plenty of good options. So starting with the armored support and battlefield supremacy. Armored support recently got a nerf. It used to reduce the cost by 2, but now it reduces the cost by 1. Still worth it. You're drawing a card for a card, you're reducing its cost, you're still paying 2 for it, but you have great options, and getting to choose that option is the best part about this. You choose what you need for the situation you're in. If you are playing towards the late game and you just need some bombs in the late game, then you choose the largest option available. And if you're in the early game and you need some more small cost cards in your hand, then you pull this bike or something else that's small, and you're reducing the cost of this by 1. That becomes a turn 5 play. It's not a great turn 5 play, but you can also stretch this out turn 3, and then turn 4 play this and a 2 drop. That's probably the best combination, and this is most significant early game where you can remove one of their small guys, and then you still have this 2/3/2 on the board, which doesn't last very long at only 2 health, but you can still get a 2-for-1. So very strong card here. I'd run this in almost any deck just for the card advantage and the great filling of this 3 slot. There's other good options available at 3 for guys here. I think the Stern Guard Sergeant's pretty good at 3/3/3, and he deals 2 damage to a random enemy. You'll hit that on your turn 3, and then any other turns, if he's still out there on turn 4, you usually hit the Codex on turn 4. It's nice as an odd number to have these cards just to mix it up, because you have plenty of 2 drops, but have some 3 drops in there as well. It does help hit your Codex later, and then him dealing damage. The random enemy is not great, but typically you're dealing with a small board, because you're usually playing control, or at least I am. So it's easy enough to predict or mitigate the randomness. Just play him last, and when you can have it as clear as possible. Primaris Inceptor is playable as pseudo removal as well. He flanks in and then hits for 4. So trading for anything with 4 health or less. that's quite a good trade as a surprise, especially. In draft, this is going to be very strong. In constructed, it depends on how many 3s you want to run. We've already covered a lot of solid cards here. Tyrannic War Veteran is decent enough. He gets at least +1 every turn and more. So he's still going to be that 3/3/3, or likely more, depending on when you play him. It's just a matter of how you value the direct damage versus the additional melee. This is repeatable, but this is almost uncapped. But you're only going to be playing it on typically early turns or relatively empty boards anyway, so it's not like he's going to get huge necessarily, but there are those opportunities to play him against a full board where then all of a sudden you got a huge value for 3. So the Intercessor Sergeant is vanilla 2/4/3. Being vanilla, just not going to make the cut into a constructed deck. He's fine in draft just as a body. And the Eliminator 1/4/3 with Sniper and Camouflage. Camouflage becomes a little more relevant here because your opponent's going to want to get rid of this guy because he's sniping for 4. So you can get a lot of value for this guy if your opponent can't get rid of him. But it's not going to be tons of value. It's still just a 3 body in a very crowded 3 slot. But he's playable for sure, and especially in draft where you're going to be going up against a lot of smaller creatures. Having snipe for 4, especially turn 3, you can get rid of all the early bodies that your opponent's playing. So definitely playable, but not necessarily of the strength that you want a lot of these in your constructed deck. So we have a few stratagems available here. We have +1 ranged attack and trigger their codex abilities. It isn't going to get you a lot on a combat trick. It can get you a little bit on a damage increase and pump some damage. Trigger the codex abilities, you can get a few things out of it, but in a pure codex deck, this is probably a lot better. But in a regular deck where codex is just kind of present in the deck, you don't necessarily want to dedicate a whole card to triggering your codex abilities, as we discussed with the 0 cost card. Getting this minor buff out of it. I suppose this is permanent, which is a little better, but it doesn't seem necessarily worth it, and doesn't do anything on its own. It isn't going to swing the game at any point. +2 melee attack for your troops until next turn. Could be a finishing card. That's boom, game over. If you have the right board state and you have this card at the right point, you could use this to trade a small creature for a bigger one, but then that's card disadvantage. You spent 2 cards to get rid of their 1. So stratagems need to be worth being in your deck, otherwise you're not getting the value out of them. Draw 2 cards for 3. That's great for drawing cards. Replaces itself +1 more card. You're spending energy. If you're playing for the late game, that's fine. I think there's better options at 3 energy. Drawing 2 cards is significant, but you draw 1 off of this, draw 1 off of this, you get a 2 for 1 off of this. You can maybe get a 2 for 1 off of this. You got lots of stuff at 3. But this is like a standard level card. It's at the bar it needs to be. it just may or may not find a home in your constructed deck. Drafted, it's fine. Card draw isn't necessarily going to be as important there. You're just trying to have stuff on the board generally. But it's decent enough. And in a pure control deck where you need more card draw, 2 cards for 3 energy is not bad. But I would like to have more impact. Like this card. Or point blank shot. So that's the options available for 3 energy. And there's a lot of them. So consider what's good early game and late game. And take what's going to have the most impact on your game. And that's kind of the theme for all these mid-range cards here is you have the options. There's a lot of solid cards. It's just what's going to be the best value, in this case on your 4 energy turn. And then what is still a solid card to be drawing late game. 10 energy, 11 energy, 12 energy. What do you do? What do you pull off your deck? What do you add to the board? Does it do anything at all? And you need to have that value in a constructed deck. Every card. In a draft deck, you know, every single card here is fine here in a draft deck. They all impact the board enough. Least of all, this vanilla creature. He's a vehicle, but for 4 energy, a vanilla has no place in a constructed deck. He's just fine in draft. We do have 2 of our best removals here at 4 energy. So deal 5 damage for 4 energy, or deal 2 damage to all enemies for that 4 energy. And probably we'll be running 2 of each in every Ultramarines deck. This is just great removal. This is some of our best removal, and they're both here at this 4 slot. And Terraconus is amazing if you're running vehicles. If you've got the vehicles, then he makes them better. He's a decent enough body, 3, 4, 5 health for 4 energy. He's fine. But disadvantage, play this on for 4 and then follow it up on your 5 energy turn with a 5 energy vehicle, or even something, you know, turns this even good. It makes all of your vehicles better. And if he's sticking around, you can make your vehicles stick around even more. Armor, Vanguard, almost any vehicle would benefit from that, except for the really small ones. It doesn't become worth it necessarily, but absolutely if you're running vehicles, he's worth it. If you're not running vehicles, then he's not worth it, because he's kind of overcosted at that point at 3, 4, 5 for 4. This guy's a better Vanguard than the 2-cost Vanguard. He'll actually stick around at 5 energy. Your opponent really has to spend some of their resources to remove this at 5 energy. You really have to get rid of him. And it's not necessarily going to be as easy as just throwing some attacks at it, because he's hitting back for 4. So, solid 4 drop. And you see the easy comparison with the Terraconus. This Honor Guard's just a way better card, except for the vehicle aspects, where this just becomes unbelievably good. So it just depends on what you're trying to do with your deck. And you can see some of the easy comparisons and why it's important to look at these at a particular energy level when you start comparing some of these bodies. So another relatively simple card here, Hellblaster for 4. 2 melee, 4 range, 4 body. But then he's blasting for 2. At 4 energy, he's, you know, stronger than some units, but he isn't going to stick around the battlefield for very long. You're probably not going to get a chance to shoot him, really. The enemy warlord is just going to slam into him along with something else, and he's only hitting back for 2. And he'll just disappear before he gets to hit. When he does hit, that's fine. You know, you hit for 4, +2/+2, potentially off of the blast. That's 8 damage. That's significant, but you're not going to be able to use him for removal. You're not going to be able to even really make favorable trades with him. He's just going to disappear. And if that's the case, you're better off running the Honor Guard. He'll stick around longer and force them to attack him even more so. He's got more health, more melee when he's being attacked. So a clear advantage, I think, unless you're really going for the aggressive damage deck, in which case this is probably your best 4-drop for more damage aside from your removal type damage. And it's worth noting that this is just deal 5 damage. You can go to the face with this, and this is a finisher. This is maybe the best card in the deck. So a few more 4-drops here. Primaris Chaplain for 4. +1 melee, +1 range attack to your other infantry troops. Permanent buff, repeatable on Codex. Solid. He becomes something that your opponents have to deal with. They can't ignore him and just leave him there. You drop him on 4. It's your other infantry troops though, so limited selection, you know, not vehicles, but a lot of your smaller drops are infantry, so if you have anybody out at this point, it's probably an infantry troop. Get that +1/+1, that's pretty nice. Late game, this is fine. You got some stuff out there, anything out there, any pluses. And then even if you don't have stuff out there, this kind of stuff scares your opponent and they're gonna want to trade him. So a little more aggressive maybe than the Honor Guard, but overall I'd still say probably the Honor Guard has more of a place in most constructed decks and in draft decks as well probably, but any of these guys or anything here is good in draft. And the only other one we haven't discussed is Sergeant Electus. Codex, blind a random enemy. Being random here is strongly against this being very effective. If you're blinding something for some combat tricks or to get better trades, get some 2-for-1s out of it, then you don't want it to be random 50-50 between that troop and the Warlord. Random really hurts this, but it's repeatable and it's okay. 5/2, 4 body, or I'm still going back to the Honor Guard. He's just a nice body. 4/4, 5. You get more out of him, whereas this, it's too easy to trade at 2 ranged attack. They're just gonna slap it, and you're not gonna get a whole lot of blinds out of it. And the blind may or may not hit what you want it to get a good trade out of it. So not even as consistent as the Primaris Chaplain, which is limited. Like I said, everything's good in draft here, and it becomes a matter of what you want to do overall with what goes into constructed. I guess that's kind of an obvious statement, but this removal is probably always going to be in there, and then probably a few of these guys based on what fits with the rest of your deck. Probably not the Invader, probably not the Sergeant, probably not the Hellblaster. I think there's opportunity to do pure infantry. In which case the Primaris Chaplain becomes one of your strongest units. You'd want 2 at that point. But you have less finishers and limited overall. Be interesting to try that though. Let's move on to the 5s. The outstanding card here is this. This is your best removal overall. Destroy any enemy troop. Just boom, inspired retribution. So it's expensive at 5, but you can trade it for things that cost a lot more than 5. and on your terms and timing. So very strong. Just an understatement to say that removal is strong and important in this game and in these decks that you'll be running as Ultramarines. So, one other stratagem here. Gather the company, draw 3 troops from your deck. If you're running a creature deck, draw 3 for 5. It's not bad. You get the consistency. It becomes pretty good late game. I mean, even later turns, you top deck this. Great. Spend 5, draw 3 troops, play some or all of those in the same turn. Has potential to significantly impact the board. Even though the card does nothing on itself, it just draws you more cards, but that's what you want, typically. But for 5, on your turn, on your 5 energy turn, it's not great. Can't play it earlier than that, so it's really a late game card. And then how much are you getting out of your troops? Card draw is always good, so it's definitely playable, but maybe not your best card draw, and maybe not your best 5 drops. So our other 5 cards here, everything here is playable in draft for sure. Our weakest one here is probably this 5/5/5 for 5. Blast 1. Blast 1 is just kind of pinging your adjacent stuff. It's not hugely impactful. So it's better than being vanilla here, but as small of a step up from vanilla as you can get, really. The Apothecary has a bit more influence. 5/5/5 for 5. Healing 2 to a random friendly unit, but he's only going to be healing stuff that needs healing, so that's relatively simple to predict and see where it's going to heal. It's not going to have a whole lot of options there usually, and almost anything you want healed, you have available to heal, you want healed, so it's good. It's not hugely impactful though, but either of these 5/5 for 5s, that's something to deal with for your opponent. It's quite significant. If we jump over to this Primaris Judiciaire, 6/2. This 2 makes him easier for your opponent to deal with. The Vanguard is nice, but then your opponent's attacking in with ranged and only taking 2 damage back. Stun a random enemy, you can get at least once, maybe repeating if it takes him more than 1 turn to deal with this guy. But again, dealing a random enemy isn't necessarily going to be ideal for you. He's worth playing, I think, for sure. Yeah, he's worth playing. I don't know if you necessarily want to have 2 stunners out there. If your opponent doesn't have 2 more guys out there, then you think your second Judiciaire is doing very little. And if your opponent has a bunch of small guys out there that you don't even care if they're stunned or not, then your Judiciaire is doing very little. But 6 health and hitting for 6 is pretty significant, so I think definitely worth running 1. And having 2 in a deck I think wouldn't be the worst thing ever. Sargentelion on a Codex hit gives Sniper to all of your units, which includes your Warlord. This is almost a guarantee of combat tricks, so you hit that easily enough when he comes in on 5, you'll probably, well, you'll at least have your Warlord out there, and maybe have some other small guys out there, and then they can get rid of almost anything out of on the board at that point using their snipers. Very favorable trades to be made there if you have to trade anything at all. And then repeating that on your 6 energy or 7 energy turn, or bringing this guy in the late game when you have bigger things out there. Sniper becomes hilariously powerful when you have a Dreadnought or something out. just wipes everything without any damage taking any damage off of it. So it can be very powerful to give sniper to all of your units. He's a legendary, so you can only have one, and this camouflage is pretty nice on him because your opponent is not going to be wanting him to stick around. So worth running one for sure. Pretty solid on your 5 slot. And then finally we have the Primaris Impulsor. 2 melee. Recently got nerfed down to 3 ranged from 4. But you're not necessarily using him for a lot of damage anyways. You're dropping this on turn 5, your 5 energy turn, and getting at least one of these out of it. And then if you're lucky, he'll stick around, and then you'll get another one of these out next turn, and maybe even another one, who knows. But seeing these come out repeatedly, it's like card advantage, huge card advantage. And your opponent's not going to let that stand, and this 2 melee attack isn't going to keep them off of you. So he's going to hit this. He's going to get rid of it. You're probably only going to get one out of it. You may not even get a hit with it. So the nerf doesn't really hurt it too much. The question of whether it's worth it, I mean, 2 for 1, maybe 3 for 1 if you can stick it around, but definitely get a 2 for 1 out of it, and creating a problem for your opponent. It's definitely worth running. 1, getting 2 of them in your hand can be a bummer. You don't necessarily want to keep playing these, but the value's there. The threat it creates is significant enough to warrant being in your deck. And he's a vehicle, so he interacts with our Antero Cronus, which will give it flank on the way in. That can give it more value. But only hitting for 3, it's not huge that it hits that turn. But having 5 health means you can get usually a hit or 2 off with it. So several good options for 5, and reviewing again, this is just essential removal here, and then you'll want to run a few more 5-drop guys. It's just a question of which ones you run. I'd say one of these, maybe one of these, one of these, maybe one of these, and I think that's exactly what I have in my deck right now. It's just kind of a spread of one of each of those 4. The Aggressor Sergeant, not quite up to that same level, but still a very solid guy. I'd love to see him come in a draft game. That's a great top deck. Moving on to turn 6. And we're starting to get to the higher costed cards where you may not even hit these on the turn. So hitting these on turn 6 is nice, but there's other ways to hit 6. You can do 4 plus 2 quite often on turn 6. So even if you didn't have any 6 drops in your deck, you'd still be alright to hit your Codex on turn 6. But going into late game, 10 energy, 11, 12, having 6 drops in there is significant on those turns. You're dropping 2 things on this level, a 5 plus 6 or 6 plus 6, 6 plus 4, whatever you're dropping. These 6 drops can be pretty influential, but all the more important that they have a huge impact on the board. For these are starting to get into the late game bombs. They need to be a late game bomb, or they have no place in your deck. So 6 cards available here. And 5 of them are troops. One of them is a stratagem. Chapter Council, choose a troop from your deck and jot heal 6 to your warlord. For 6 energy, as I just discussed, that's either going to be a huge 6 energy turn, or late game, you'll be hitting like a 6 plus 4, 6 plus 5. And is this a late game bomb? You draw a card and you heal 6. Healing 6 isn't necessarily going to swing your game. Some games are real close and come down to just one person being at 4 health and the other person finally loses, and gosh, you know, another 6 health would have swung that game, but that's not most games. You either have control of the game or you don't, and 6 health either way isn't going to make a huge difference typically in a lot of games. And drawing a troop for 6 mana is a lot of energy to spend on drawing 1 card and healing your warlord for 6, which, you know, given in some games could swing the game, but not most of the time. And I think this card is just overcosted. If this cost 4, then it would be more closer to playable. But at 6/6, it's not playable. In constructed. In draft, it has the same problems in draft, so it's not that strong there, but you don't necessarily have a choice if you have one in draft. So, looking at our available 6-drop troops, Blade Guard Veteran, 6/7 health with Vanguard. He has 2 ranged attacks, so your opponent's not really scared of him. He'll get worn down. The Vanguard can help hold off your opponent for a whole turn or more with 7 health here. And then he heals 3 with Codex, but he doesn't heal past 7 here, so the Codex on the turn that you play him in doesn't do anything for this guy. Only if he makes it through to your next turn and he's still alive, you hit Codex, he heals. That can be helpful. Building up his defense, staying defensive here behind him, but he may or may not be here on the next turn, considering he's not very scary. And your opponent has no other choice but to attack him anyways. He's not the strongest option for Vanguard. I am still a big fan of the Honor Guard. 4/4, 5/4. I think you defend yourself with those. And maybe play other things for 6 energy. Company Ancient gives a buff to your other units, all other units, including your Warlord. Well, he's on the board. 6/6 for 6 health. This is something your opponents are scared to swing into. But your opponents have to deal with him almost first because he's buffing up all of your other units. This is worth playing at 6 energy on your 6 energy turn. This is worth playing late game. 10 energy, 12 energy turn. Play it then. Still has huge impact. And he's going to swing for 6. And that's going to trade with anything or stay alive or 6 to the face is no joke. So Company Ancient becomes more survivable than this Vanguard guy. Has maybe more impact to the game and more of a threat for your opponent to deal with. So very strong, I think. If you want 2 of them, I don't know. They certainly stack. Maybe harder for your opponent to deal with the second one coming down, but mixing up your threats is also beneficial as well. Only 3/5 here for 6. But blasts for 3. Blasting 3 is significant. That kills a lot of things that are just sitting next to whatever you're shooting at. You shoot for 6, +3/+3. It's better than the 4-drop blast guy for sure. This guy was blast 2 on 2/4. Not really worth it. But the Dissolution Marine can start clearing out the board. You're hitting for 5. You may be killing 2 other things. It can swing the game, but only hitting 3 melee isn't discouraging your opponent from swinging into him as much. Only 6 health. You may or may not stick around unless you've got some defense up around him. So he's not a game swinging bomb, but he's a decent enough 6-drop, and he's going to be great in draft. Grab this in draft. There's practically a bomb in draft. Inceptor Sergeant, flying flank, 6 damage on flank. That's huge. That's one of our. That's practically great removal there. Deal any troop 6 damage out of nowhere. That's solid. And 6 health. He sticks around. You know, he can deal some damage, get rid of something, and still be around as a 3/6. He's flying, so this 3 becomes less relevant, and your opponent might have to swing into him for 6. That's significant. Is he as good as Company Agent? No. But using this as pseudo removal, that's great. If you need more removal, this is a way to do it. This guy's really strong in draft, and playable and constructed, but not necessarily our best 6 drop, or not necessarily our best removal. Lieutenant Calcius. Codex, deal 3 damage to the enemy warlord. The main benefit here is that it's repeatable. So you hit it on turn 6, you hit your Codex again on turn 7, hit it again on turn 8, and that's repeating damage to your opponent. Not to mention he swings for 6. Only having 3 ranged attack, he's not really hard for your opponent to get rid of. This late in the game, your opponent's going to be able to swing for 6, and they're not necessarily going to be too scared of taking 3 damage off of it. So you're not necessarily going to stick around for a long time to get this repeating damage. But you play it for 6, you get your 3 damage in, you make a significant trade with one of your opponent's bombs, or you get some kind of 2-for-1 off of that, then that's almost like a 3-for-1. It's a solid enough card, especially to run 1. I don't know if you want to, it's kind of jamming up the slot, but it's definitely playable. I wish it had a little more ranged attack, but then it might become overpowered at that point. It's fairly balanced at this point and competitive among these other 5 troops you have as options for 6 energy. So everything's good in draft, and some of these are really strong in draft, and mostly everything's playable and constructed, but my personal preference is for this. It's going to have the most impact on your 6 energy turn, and the most impact on your late game turns when you're playing them later. Immediate impact when you play them, as opposed to some of these other ones which you have to wait to have impact. This has immediate impact when you play it, 3 damage, but you'll probably get more value out of your +1/+1 to everybody. Doing 6 surprise damage is very strong as well. It just depends on how much removal you need, especially late game. So moving to 7 cost, Angels of Death has been bumped up to 7 cost. I thought it was overcost at 6. I think this is not a great card. Deploy 4 Primaris Tamer Intercessors and give them flank. So we take these 2/2 with 3 health and bring them in as flank. So we're doing combat tricks and considering it pseudo removal. What are we removing? If your opponent has 4 more small bodies out there, you got a pretty wide line already, and great, we play 4 of these, we trade them down, maybe these live, maybe they don't, they have 3 health. They're not sticking around the board for long, they have 3 health, a lot of things they'll just trade with, and if they survive anything, then they're just sitting there with 1 health. So maybe you can get some wide damage out of it. Compare it to this card, deal 2 damage to all enemies, which hits your enemy warlord as well. It's as wide as, even wider. No limit to how wide this is. This is just way stronger. And this is 7 energy now. What if your opponent has a giant body down there and you want to throw everything into it? Okay, you get 2 times 4 damage, you get 8 damage to it. That's enough to kill most anything. Great. Compare that to Inspired Retribution, destroy any enemy troop, regardless of how much health it has. Regardless of if it has armor or shields, or I think it does block by shield, but you can deal with these things and get more out of that for 5 than you can for 7 here. If you just want to play him and wait till your next turn, it's card advantage. You get 4 guys for 1 card. You could potentially trade that for 4 of his cards worth of stuff. That's the best way to use it, is to try for some card advantage like that and use up a bunch of his cards off of one of your cards. But it's not your strongest card by any stretch of the means. 7 energy needs to be game changing, not just a slightly modified version of Stormraven. So I am not the biggest fan of Angels of Death. Let me know if you have any strong opinions otherwise. And really all of these 7 drops just don't have enough impact to be justifying their existence on your 7 energy turn, using your entire energy pool to play one of these. Now draft, this is a bomb. Deal with it. They may or may not have removal. They may or may not have anything that can trade with this. You might just clear their board, just for them to avoid having to take 9 to the face. In Constructed, this has no impact when it comes down. It just comes down and sits there and is a magnet for your opponent's removal. That's probably its best use right there, is to use it to soak up removal before you play something even better. But for melee is pretty good, and 8 health is significant, so not every piece of removal is going to get rid of this, and it'll be difficult to remove, but it really has no place in a constructed deck. The Librarian for 7 energy draws a card on Codex, so you hit it on your turn 7. It's not a huge threat for your opponent to deal with, but he might feel that he has to avoid taking 8 damage repeatedly. So he may or may not get another card, but always getting 1 card off of it's some good value, and then having this 8/5 with 8 health is a significant impact on the board. Whether that makes him worth playing, he's probably the strongest 7 drop. If you want something for 7, then it's probably your best bet. In my opinion, you're better off just playing one of those mini 5 drops that we had, and a 2 drop, like your draw a card for 2 or something else for 2, and one of these. That makes a better turn 7, I think, than any of these. 2/6 with flying means your opponent's probably going to have to do the 6 damage to deal with it. 7 health is significant. He's great, but he's not game changing, doesn't do anything on his own when he hits the board. He's just a big body. It's hard to deal with a little bit. So it's a bomb in draft, but it's not game changing late game when you need a game changing card on your 7 energy turn or later. But being a vehicle, he's also a good target for armored support. So that'll be one of your options sometimes off of armored support. It costs 1 less, and then you have this in your hand waiting maybe turn 6. It's still fun to play. He's fine. So it's not bad, but we start to get into some really strong cards here, and it's hard to justify having one of these 7 cost cards in your hand over one of these 8 costs. Even though at the beginning of this video I said you can't really compare cards across energy costs with these Ultramarine decks because of the Codex. As you get into the higher energy, the energy cost itself becomes less significant. You either have that energy or not. A turn 8 play versus turn 9 play versus turn 10 play isn't as big of a difference as the difference between your turn 3, turn 4, turn 5s, where you just need to be hitting that power level, or you'll be outclassed by what your opponent is playing. Here there's less of a difference between the power level of an 8 cost, a 9 cost, a 10 cost. And there's a significant jump. Like I said, I'm not too impressed by any of the 7 costs, but these 8 costs become unbelievable. So they have much more of a place in your deck. Starting with the Assault Centurion, he's fine. Vanguard Armor 2, very difficult to deal with, and they have to deal with him. They can use some just hard removal, but not even every deck is going to have access to that. This 2 armor is especially what I'm talking about in dealing with this. They have to slap him for 3 or more. I mean, anything they do, like they have to hit for 4 to even do 2. So it's usually going to take them a few hits to deal with this, and that's going to cost them coming into them. But it's just hard to deal with. He's not doing a whole lot else. But it's hard to deal with in one turn, so you might get some hits out of him. That's good. However, you can guarantee yourself some hits out of the Redemptor Dreadnought, because you'll hit Codex on the turn you drop him in, and if he's still alive, you can try and hit this Codex again. And this is wide damage to everybody. If you repeat that especially, it can be a huge amount of damage. You're getting 10, 12, 15 damage out of this guy. And then he's hitting potentially for 8 if he's sticking around, which at 8 energy, at 8 health, he is sticking around. So very difficult to deal with, and does tons of damage. That's about the best card in the game. Jumping over to this 10 energy Repulsor Executioner, just because it's so comparable to your Dreadnought. Costs 2 energy more, hits harder, has more health. It's better, but he's only hitting 1 troop on the way in instead of your 1 to 2 damage to everybody. You probably get more damage out of the 1 to 2 damage to everybody, depending on how many troops your opponent has out. But 8 damage to any specific energy troop is removal for almost anything. There's only a few things that aren't going to survive taking 8 damage. If this guy lives to your next turn, which he very well may at 12 health, when he hits, 10 damage plus 4 to the adjacent units. And these are vehicles, so if you can hit that haste on the way in, the amount of damage that this thing can do in 1 turn is probably more than any other card. So absolutely has a place if you're playing for the late game. If you're playing for an aggressive early game, then you're not going to get to 10 energy to play this. The game will be over by then, and you don't need these late game cards. But if you're playing late game cards, this is just the best one, and this is really close and better in some ways for the repeatable damage and the wide damage. So 2 more cards here to address. Avenging Zeal. Give +2 melee, +2 range to all of your units in play and in hand. Game winning. If you have any sort of attack about to go, you hit this on 8, +2/+2, clear the board, smash into them. Very strong. If you don't have anything on the board, turn 8, then this doesn't do anything. I suppose it does buff your Warlord, that's not nothing. But this has a very strong place as a finisher in a creature deck. You're rushing out a bunch of small guys, and you slap something like this down for the game win. This is your top of your curve of your Weenie Rush deck. In a control deck or a deck where you're not trying to have a bunch of creatures out and you're just playing for the end game, this is not a winning end game card compared to a Dreadnought or an Executioner. So if you have the deck for this, definitely play it. Otherwise, it just doesn't have a place in most decks. And Captain Sicarius, I believe, as our last card. Has invulnerable during your turn with the talent Greatest Deeds. Give Vanguard and heal 5 to a friendly troop. So it's heal 5, not give 5 health. So you're only going to get it back up to however it was, giving a Vanguard. It's definitely not game-changing, game-winning. Has invulnerable during your turn. Means you can smash into some things and get some good value out of it. It's hard for them to deal with. They can only deal damage on their turn. It's our only 9-drop, so if you're looking for a 9-drop, that's the way to go. But compared to dealing 8 damage on the way in and hitting comparably hard, take the Executioner or the Dreadnought over him. Worth noting, he's infantry. If you're doing big infantry deck, then there's not a lot that hits just infantry. +1 off the chaplain. I think the big vehicles is better than big infantry. Play into that with the rest of your deck. Hit these threats at the end of the game. I won't bother going into the offense-defense cards. You just take what works for you as you unlock those. I haven't unlocked them all myself, so I can't even give too strong of an opinion on them. But obviously, if you're going for troops, go for the troops. If you're not, then don't. If you're not, then hit your damage. It's a game you're willing to play. If you're not planning on having troops out there, then what do you care if everything takes damage? It's extra removal for you. You get lucky off of that. Earning a skull for 1 energy. I'm unclear myself on how controllable that is. You don't necessarily want to be randomly adding energy to yourself. It's nice to have more energy, sure, but you're planning ahead on your turns and you're trying to hit codex and getting unpredictable +1 energy. It's not entirely unwelcome, but might mess you up. On defense, this makes it easier to hit codex. This makes it easier to ramp. It's just real solid. I'll probably run that. Even over this, just one-time armor isn't particularly strong. 2 damage to an energy as a one-time option for 1. That's great. As removal, probably even better than the Hive Factory, but Hive Factory is pretty solid. Half your games you get this -1 cost. You hit this early game to get a little boost, or you just hold on to this the whole game and hit it late game and hit something bigger than you would ordinarily. You know, it'd be like turn 11 and you hit 6+6 because you got a -1. But you often end up with a lot of cards in your hand, and you don't want to hit your max hand size because you're trying to save these little buffs for late game. So I think I covered really every card here. Post below if you got any questions, comments, disagreements, anything like that. We'll discuss it, and I might try and update if there's any significant updates. But for now, this is what I think about these cards. Nearly everything's playable in draft, and it's just a matter of focusing your deck in the direction you want to go to get the best value out of every possible card you draw. That's all I have to say about that, so thanks for watching.